Well, no further ado, because Aaron needs no introduction, he is well known, I will let you go, and I will go like that, and we will disappear.
All right. Awesome. Cool. All right. Thank you. Obviously, Shanna, Ian, Hoodie, Brian, etc., and all the team for putting this on again. Really appreciate the work that you guys all do towards this and bringing people together. So hopefully, I don't disappoint too much by being the first one off the of the weekend, or if I do, I'll set a reasonably low bar so everyone else can come over the top. So my talk, Profit Through Misery. So my base for this is that the share price of a company is significantly damaged by a security breach for about 5 minutes. That's really about it. And all this started for me back in about 2011. I was in the industry for 7, 8 years or so by then, and RSA got popped. And the notion that a security company, a massive kind of security company, could have suffer a security incident. The compromise actually, is around one of your core security services that you deliver, and then that's used to, basically go into large defense contractors and all of that. I basically thought that was going to be the the end of the line, effectively, for that organization for it. But it wasn't. It wasn't. So I'm assuming you guys can see my mouse in that here, but on the far left-hand side, this is roughly when that sort of breach occurred. At the time, RSA were part of EMC Corp. I think they made in maybe 5% of the overall value, something like that. And the drop was a couple of dollars in the share price. Not sure what happened later there. Maybe that was related, maybe it wasn't. But at the end of the day, even if I take a long view, within about a year, it was all back to where it was, and they were, and they kept going. So I guess to me, the view is that if a security breach of a security company compromising its core security services isn't enough to kill a company, then it shouldn't stop others, right? And whilst all of the security people working for that organisation that's been compromised are going through one of the 9 circles of incident response hell, maybe we can make some money from the whole thing. But before I get too far into that bit, I am not a lawyer. I am not a financial planner. I am not a financial advisor. And everything I've got in this talk has come from that lovely thing, the internet. So there's a good chance bits and pieces of it are wrong. So there's nothing from the inside that's been taken here. It's all news articles, what's reported. I'm definitely not going to say every single number and every single value here is correct, but hopefully directionally it's about in the right way for it. And I probably don't need to say this, but I will. If you are involved with an organisation that goes through a breach, or maybe you're providing response services to them, and you start buying and selling shares, I imagine you might have some very nice people from the government wanting to come and talk to you about it. So yeah, as far as kind of crimes go, let's just not do crimes would be good. I don't want to have that on my conscience. Now, there's a bunch of content already out there around this topic. There's a heap of it, a lot of it. People have written PhD theses and stuff like that on it. So there's a lot of detail out there already, and a lot more of a scientific approach to what I've taken with my research in this space. The main reason for me doing it, though, is that most of what's out there is pretty US-centric. There's very little sort of looking down at our part of the world down here, and I wanted to put a little bit of a local flavour to it all. So I spent some time looking through, I'll say recent-ish, last 3-4 years or so of breaches impacting Australian listed entities. I've got a couple of lists on there which aren't included just because people go, hang on, why didn't you talk about Optus? Why didn't you talk about Toll? That's because they're not on the ASX, or they're private companies, they're not listed. So I'm only worried about organisations listed on the ASX. And as you can see on that right column, there's a couple I spent the most time on, and a few that I spent a little bit of time on, and I'll touch on those ones at the end. So the first one, so our friends at Medibank, this is about 18 or so months ago, had a nice little compromise. I think there was an order of around 10 million people affected, names, addresses, Medicare numbers. I think there was some health claim data and those types of things in there. So definitely not a good day for all those concerned at Medibank or the people affected by it. And I tried to be very smart about this. I tried to look and track the share price for Medibank, and I tried to find other companies that were in the same sort of market segment and kind of track them to see if the market overall changed or if it was just them. Realistically, I kind of shit can this approach pretty quickly because we just don't have a big enough kind of market here in Australia where there's a large number of entities there. I think I was tracking Medibank against NIB for this one. And even then, they had some interesting events in that as well, which made it a bit tricky. So I kind of abandoned the idea of trying to index against the sort of market segment and really just look at the company itself. So spent some time looking through, market events and market announcements by the organisation and seeing how that kind of tracked along with changes to share prices and that. Spent a little bit of time trying to get some information out of Google Trends and some similar items like that. I guess what I was hoping to find was that there might be some correlation between the amount of searches that are basically happening or the amount of news articles that are happening around that topic and how that might impact the size of the impact on share prices. As it turned out, though, I couldn't find much by way of numbers on this. I mean, all this Google Trend data is very much around an interest rating up to 100. It's not really a numerical guess. There were X number of searches for this term on this day, which meant it was pretty hard when I tried to compare this against different breaches that happened to try and, I guess, give an idea to the relative change with them. So a little bit of information around it, but nothing that I could use too heavily there. So at the end of it, it really came down to the raw content that I had from the just tracking the share price overall for the organisations affected. So for Medibank, the idea here was that once I think they had a trading halt for a little while, once they came out of that towards the end of October, basically things didn't go great on that first day, dropped down by about 15, 17, 18% or thereabouts. And then in the ensuing sort of week or two, sort of bounced around a bit and hit a low point there. And then over time, we found that it sort of rose up and recovered and then went on from that point forward. So we're in a position where, pardon me, where price before the breach about $3.50. Again, these numbers are sort of rounded. Low point $2.73. Loss of just over 20%. Took a couple of weeks to get there, although the bulk of that was on day one. And then it took us about 6 months to sort of recover that back up to that sort of pre-breach type of value for it. And then the next one, in a bit more recently, about 12 months or so ago, Latitude Financial and their incident. This was pretty big as well. I think originally they said around 300-ish thousand customers impacted, and then I think that ballooned out to something like 14 million. I don't know how that was possible, but that's what they got to for it. And I think that was a ransomware and data exfil type incidents there. So fairly public type of event there affecting a large part of Australia by way of customers. Acknowledged around the 16th of March. Again, a bunch of reports out from them, referencing the event, what they've termed the cybercrime activity over the month of March and into April. Again, another view of that for how those market announcements sort of relate to the share price. And again, that sort of Latitude breaches as by way it looks in Google Trends. Again, not really too much of value in here because it was very hard to compare apples with apples, say the Medibank equivalent to Latitude when they're not actually referencing raw numbers. They come up with this sort of interest factor type level. So again, came back to that sort of raw sort of chart to basically show how they've actually gone about it. This is then the incident happened around here mid-March when they opened trading. After about a week or so in halt, basically had a pretty sizable drop on that first day, and then a fairly quick recovery to the whole thing. Whether that was just a temporary recovery here, where that sort of grid point is looking at there, or whether there was something else that happened which caused it to drop afterwards, I'm not too sure. But either way, it was a pretty quick sort of recovery period for it. And when I look even just at the raw numbers and what I could see by way of the comparison between Latitude and Medibank, there was a lot of there was a heck of a lot of interest and news articles and sort of publications around and discussion around it between the two. So there's an interesting one as to why this was seemingly a much quicker recovery compared to the other, when they were both pretty sizable PII type events that happened. But yeah, overall, about a 16-ish% drop in share price, really in that first day, and then it took a few days to come back. If that was just the temporary kind of reprieve, or a couple of weeks to come back over there. And then, I'll talk a bit more about some of these other ones that I looked at, and the reason I didn't get much further into them. So the ones for Nine Entertainment, they had, I think, a ransomware event over one weekend. I think it disrupted some operations for it. Woolworths had this My Deal subsidiary. There was a lot of customers impacted under that. I think it was over 2 million or so, but a number of those were just, an email address was compromised. Not much more severe than that. TPG had an incident where some of their old IINet and WestNet customers had their basically email compromised. I think the attackers were looking for something to get access to crypto wallets and that there. And then Telstra had a couple of items around, I think, something around their like a staff benefits type portal. And then I think they basically had a bit of an own goal with some databases and sort of had some customer data published there. The reason those ones I don't have as much information on is there was not, for some of them, there wasn't nearly as much market attention on them. Nine, Woolies and TPG, they all had announcements by the organisations to the ASX acknowledging something that had happened. Telstra didn't seem to, though, at all for that one. But they also had a lot of other events happening around the same time. So there was like quarterly earnings reports come out, and there was other things like this. So it made it pretty hard to say, could there be a clear link between the performance of the shares for that organisation over the ensuing day, week, month, and the actual incident for it. So it was a bit limited for that one. So at the end of it, I kind of got to the position that the two big ones that we looked at had some pretty sizable impacts and varying kind of recovery timeframes for them both. So the bit that I got to for that, and when I sort of started this, and it's kind of been a talk that I've actually picked up and done bits of research off and on for about the last 5 or 6 years for it. And it was really those couple of major incidents, as well as the Optus one, that sort of triggered me to actually spend some more time into this one. It's a very small sample size overall, but from those couple of ideas there, for those couple of examples there, it does seem like when there's a big Australian company breach where there's a decent amount of particularly PII impacted, the share price will drop pretty quickly. But then it's actually followed by a fairly speedy recovery for it. So the bits that I kind of take from this is to say that, again, I'm not going to tell people to go out and buy shares in these companies. I wouldn't do it just on this alone, because maybe I'm a bit too nervous about that stuff and I'm not willing to throw it at it. But when you look at this and a lot of other research I've done in broader US companies and others, a lot of them do recover very quickly. A small set of them don't. A small set of them actually take a much longer time. And definitely aware of a couple of companies in Australia that have actually closed their doors off the back of security incidents. But I think that if you're in a position where security definitely isn't your core business, it's an ancillary function. It's just something you have to operate for it, and you suffer a breach. There seems to be a real a fair amount of sort of rebound that comes pretty quickly. So I guess to me, I'm looking at this and saying, the market pays a lot of attention to security breaches. I think a lot of the time they probably worry a bit too much about what's going to happen and the fallout from it. Even looking at the cost for some of those big incidents, 60, 70, 80 million dollars or something like that. Sounds like a lot of money. It would be to anyone here as an individual, but when you're looking at multi-billion-dollar cap companies, maybe it's not as big of an impact for that. So that kind of position where you can be, where you could potentially make some money off these things and sort of follow the dip down straight after by 10 or by 20%, and then pick it up on the way up, I think is definitely a possibility. Again, I'd be a nervous person to run out and do it, but it'll be interesting to see when the next big breach happens, how share prices perform around that, whether they go to that same 10 to 20 kind of percent dip, and how quickly they bounce back from it. And the bigger part for me to take away for this is that I often see a lot of people in the security industry, and particularly those sort of newer in the industry, looking at it like security is the center of the universe. And that was me in the way, when I saw the RSA kind of breach there, it was just so focused on security as the be all and end all of things. And then you actually sit through and you go, well, organizations suffer breaches, they continue, they go on, there's more out there for it. So I guess just a general one around seeing people that just fascinate over security, and that has to be put above everything else. Definitely seen by way of how the broader markets respond to security incidents. They can get on with them and sort of recover, and these companies can, on the whole, be okay afterwards. So really, that's about all I wanted to get through there for this one. I know I'm about 3 or so minutes early for it, but I will leave it there, and I'm happy to spend some time in the questions channel in Discord and the other conference channel. I'm happy to have a bit of a chat around this if anyone's got anything they might want to throw at me. So yeah, that's about it.
No, it's very interesting to see the actual math and the sort of like the evidence behind it. I guess one question I would ask, and maybe this is a bit, spicy, do you think it's a reasonable reaction to the, and this is just your own individual opinion and those kind of things, but let's take Telstra, or, well, not Telstra, but Medibank or Optus, noting, significant amount of loss of data, all that kind of things. Is this a reasonable reaction to that thing? Are people not taking it seriously and therefore, it's not getting as big a reaction? What are your thoughts behind the reasoning behind that?
I wish it would be more, and I think if it was bigger and there were more lasting impacts, we'd probably have a much more say for the significance of security in organisations. But when if you looked at this from a non-security executive and you see these kind of case studies, I would be questioning and go, well, okay, we need to do something for security. Not saying that we don't, but do we need to spend a very significant proportion of our budget in this, or is that going to help us in other ways to expand new services, or do other things that are more probably profit generating for our organisation? I think it's pretty easy for people to go down that path for it. I think in this case, it is a lot. It's going to come from regulation is going to be the one that's going to mandate people to do things. And I know compliance doesn't equal security and all that stuff, but I think if people were left to their own devices in this space, I don't think we get the investment that I think most of us in this industry. And at the end of the day, it is our information that gets affected by these things. I want to see it looked after really, really well. And I think this does highlight, particularly those couple of examples, the notion that you need to be backburning your data, and you shouldn't be storing details on people from 10 years ago, and that because it's just no good can come of it. But yeah, I guess the last bit off the top of your question there would be, I think if anything, the impact is going to get less, just because people just start to expect that these things are commonplace. Computers are hard, this stuff's happened, and people just will stop caring about it. I mean, interesting with some of these, I don't know a huge amount about private health insurance and that, but if it was that bad, people could churn from Medibank to someone else for it overnight. Again, looking at how that company's gone, at least from what I can see publicly recorded, it all seems to be doing pretty well. So to me, it's not like 9 out of 10 people just upped and left, and the company just sort of died overnight. People just carried on because they probably went, well, these things happen and will continue. So yeah, I think it's unfortunate. I think for us from a security side, I think that these types of examples don't do much for our case. That we need sort of better security when companies can bounce back and perform pretty well afterwards for it. So I definitely think it's really that sort of regulation kind of space that sort of mandates upticks here, which we need to rely on, as opposed to people just willingly want to go out and spend a heap more money in these areas.
Yeah, I think we'll see a little bit more impact from more legal proceedings, I think, following on from some of these breaches, where organizations will have to talk a little bit about what they were doing for security before the breach and whether or not they were liable. I think that is going to have a fairly large impact, because that's also going to impact cyber insurance in a big way. If someone becomes, liable for the fact that they were not doing security right before they were breached, and that becomes public, then I think there's going to be a bigger impact on everyone in that way. I can't remember if there was a class action against Medibank or not.
It's in process.
Yeah, so things like that I think are going to be where we see the biggest impact. But historically, yeah, it's a bit disheartening that an organization can have a huge security breach and yet bounce back and keep walking along like nothing has ever happened, where people are then losing, maybe thousands of dollars to identity theft. That's, I guess, a little bit of the knock-on effect that is going to be very, very difficult to put a number on in terms of, like, what are the losses of this actual breach? You can't, it's very difficult to then go and figure out, what are the losses individually for people and put all that back into, that number as well. But there's definitely, even the RSA breach, organizations had to then go around and, change all of their RSA fobs. That's not a cheap process to go and regenerate and reissue all of those. So there's a lot of, effort that is also very hard to calculate in terms of the cost of a breach, which, again, doesn't really help our cause very much.
No, and I'm definitely not trying to say that these organisations are heartless.
Of course.
Money hungry. I mean, they're all run by people that are like you and me and whatnot, and that it's their information that gets affected by this. I don't think anyone wakes up wanting to sort of screw anyone over for it, but just raw looking at the share price by way of what the market can sort of say it's worth. If the market thought that it was going to have a bigger impact on the company longer term, then the share price should reflect that, and it just doesn't seem to be the case. It's very much a fairly short media cycle. It comes out, people are impacted, everyone's sort of running around screaming for it, and then within a matter of days in some spaces, it's kind of forgotten about it, and the world keeps turning, and that share price comes back. So if you were a creative person with some dollars to spend, you could possibly make some money off this type of thing. Again, I wouldn't go off and do it and then get angry at me because you've lost all of your life savings, but there's probably worse investment strategies out there than that.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's very human psychology. So I'm linking it back to vulnerabilities. So the cry wolf effect around vulnerabilities. Like, we've had so many named vulnerabilities over the last 5 years. I remember going to B-Sides Melbourne and everyone was like, oh, you need to fix this vulnerability, and it's a vulnerability in iOS that is only being used by nation states, that is only being used against this group of people, that's only being used by this, and then you kind of become extremely desensitized to it. And the same thing is kind of happening about breaches in general. Not only the people getting breached getting desensitized, but the people running the companies are like, it's a normal part of work. It's kind of expected. And in some ways it is, but it's how do you deal with it, and how do you make sure that you're still doing the right thing? I don't know. Yeah. It's a hard problem.
It is definitely.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. That was a great talk, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Australian Cybersecurity Awards, and hopefully I win this time. Because
it's a tough field. It is
a tough field. Yes. Yeah. All right. Thanks very much.
For those not in on the joke, it was basically awards things are scams. Is kind of where that one was going. So yeah.
Yes. If you ever have a chance to see Aaron present, and if you were at the 2019 B-Sides Perth, it's an in-joke for the 2019 B-Sides Perth. So yes, and I agree.
Awesome.
Scams. Cool.
All right. Have a great con.